All right. With his master's in urban planning from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Tod Sherman has become the planning director with the Minnesota Department of Transportation Metro Region. He assisted with the development of the department's first innovative, effective, technically sound access management manual. Having managed development of several access management plans, and as the department's authority on access management issues, Tod's going to share with us how the manual addressed crucial and challenging issues, what worked and what didn't, and plans to update the manual. Hopefully this won't set the bar too high, but Tod won the Toastmasters District 6 Humorous Speech Contest. If things don't go so well, don't worry, Tod likes to run marathons. Welcome, Tod.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for coming to this session. In 2006, we unveiled our Access Management Manual. And I absolutely love this manual. I refer to it most every day. It's really made our access decisions more consistent, more transparent, more legally defensible, and it really does weigh property rights versus safety. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is first, some of the key issues identified in our access management manual that are still applicable today. And in hindsight, what was good with those and what went wrong, which is really going to be fairly interesting, and how we're going to address that in the access management plan update. But first of all, since this is an access management conference, we need to delve into the crash data, look into accident reports. I found this 1995 Urban Transportation Monitor article, and it listed the several most interesting statements found in a crash report. And I boil that down to my top 10 favorite. I think you'll find these interesting. Actually, it was the funniest article I've seen in my life. So I hope you like these. Real life statements found in crash reports. Number 10, a pedestrian hit me and went under my car. Number 9, as I approached the intersection, a sign suddenly appeared in a place where no sign had appeared before. I was unable to stop in time to avoid the accident. Number 8, I collided with a stationary truck coming the other way. Odd. Number 7, the guy was all over the road. I had to swerve a number of times before I hit him. Glad that wasn't me. Number 6, I pulled over from the side of the road, glanced at my mother-in-law, and headed over the embankment. Real life statement number 5, an invisible car came out of nowhere, struck my car, and disappeared. Number 4, I had been shopping for plants all day and was on my way home. As I reached an intersection, a hedge sprang up, obscuring my vision, and I did not see the other car. Number 3, and this I added because I'm in Wisconsin, it's probably a Wisconsin crash report. I was thrown from the car as it left the road. I was later found in a ditch by some stray cows. Number 2, I was on my way to the doctor with rear end trouble when my universal joint gave way, causing me to have an accident. And number 1, real life statements found in crash reports. The telephone pole was approaching. I was attempting to swerve out of its way when it struck the front end. So how are we at MnDOT addressing these serious problems? No more pop-up signs. So to talk about our access management manual, I'd like to go all the way back to 2002. It was then we developed what's called interregional corridor management plans. And these plans looked at regional and interregional trade centers and the state highways and linked those and identified safety and congestion issues and proposed billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of improvements to these systems. It was interesting because a few years after these plans were developed, I was reading an article from 1938 San Francisco News called Science Fights for Auto Safety. And it was this plan that said, hey, there's proposals for billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of projects back then. And their suggestion was, we really don't have the money at this time. We have a crash problem. Let's try to get the most out of our dollars. Go for the low cost, high benefit type of improvements, such as raised medians, grassy medians, and things that could make a difference for lower costs. And that's kind of when MnDOT started turning in that direction too. We developed our access management manual. We started focusing on these projects that could really make a difference for lower cost. And so it's kind of same problem from way back then, but I think we've elevated the level of conversation. And these are some of the key issues I want to address from our access management manual. And as you can probably guess, it's the third one, the reasonable and convenient access, which got us on the Fox 9 primetime news. But this first one, the desired intersection of state highways. When we created this manual, we undertook this massive project to identify what's the distance of intersection spacing for every single highway in the metro area. What's both the primary spacing and the secondary spacing. So to do this, we identified the future functional class of every roadway on our system, and we also identified the future land use adjacent to those highways. So for example, on Highway 95, kind of in the northern part, in North Branch, there's a highway. It's currently a minor arterial, expected to be a minor arterial in the future, and its future land use is urbanizing. So we call that a 5B. And we created a chart where we looked at these classifications and we determined the desired access spacing for that. We did traffic modeling, looking at various land uses to determine where that signal progression worked for each spacing based on the amount of development. So say our 5B in North Branch, it was a quarter-mile primary spacing, and we would consider a secondary right in, right out in between that quarter-mile spacing. And lo and behold, we had a gas station proposed at this location. It was a quick trip. And current spacing, current access was at Grand and Highway 95, and they're proposing access on Hemingway and 95 is a quarter-mile away. And that met with our access spacing guidelines. We looked at sight distance. The sight distance is fantastic. There was right-of-way for right and left-hand turn lanes, so that worked out extremely well. So this categorization system was working great. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as you'd expect when you start classifying thousands of miles of highway, we did make a few mistakes. Highway 169 in Champlin on the left was considered rural, and that's more urban core. On the right, Highway 3 we categorize as a future principal arterial, and I do not believe that's the case anymore. Here is Highway 65, and one thing we failed to do is look at the next closest intersection to each of our intersections to determine what that spacing is. We know what it should be, but that information needs to be in our guidelines. Here it's probably about 50 feet, and you need to move the decimal over at least one for that to be the accurate distance. And also our intersections are changing a lot. Instead of just having a normal size intersection, suddenly with what we've heard this called J-cuts and other things, suddenly we have a 2,000-foot intersection. So my guess is it's most likely that quarter-mile spacing won't quite work when you have the 2,000-foot intersection. But by the way, these reduced conflict intersections in Minnesota, we have quite a few. We have about 14 or 15. And looking at before and after data, fatal and injury crashes have been reduced by 70%, and total crashes have been reduced by 40%. So they have really worked fantastically. And we're going to see a lot more of these. So this really is an issue with our access management guidelines, and I think we do need some more traffic studies to determine what the preferred spacing level is, and also with that secondary spacing, I'm not quite sure where you would put that, but definitely got to be careful with that. And also consistency with access management plan. When we looked at future land use, we looked at MPO plans, we looked at cities and counties' comprehensive plans. But when they suddenly they revise their future land use, their first thought isn't, oh, we better call MnDOT. No, it's very difficult to stay on top of that. So we usually review the comp plans, but sometimes it's well after the time, so we have to figure out a way to continue to coordinate. And one way that has worked well is we have developed access management plans using our guidelines as a start, where it shows a certain distance, and then we take that in far more detail, where we start looking at crash data, circumstances behind crashes. We look at the local system, we look at the built environment, and items such as that. And those have worked really well because you do get buy-ins from the local, from the businesses, et cetera. And one thing, before we had our guidelines, we always really struggled to determine what we can and can't require as far as turn lanes. For example, but now we've got our lawyers involved, and with much gnashing of teeth, they decided what we can and can't require. And if there is a new city street intersecting our highway, we can require right and left-hand turn lanes. With a private access, a new private access, we know that we have control of that access, where that access is located, whether it's a right-in, right-out access, the width of the driveway. So the lawyers thought, okay, then we also have control of the right-hand turn lane because that's an extension of the driveway, and we can require that right turn lane. But they also said with the left-hand turn lane, the city as the land use authority has to require that. We can only recommend that. So we often recommend that the city require the left-hand turn lane. So it all's clear what could possibly go wrong with that. Well, when you have the traffic volumes you have in the metro area, usually if you get over 101 vehicles generated, say it's a new restaurant, it meets warrants for both a right and a left-hand turn lane. So we're going to be requiring that right turn lane. We're going to be recommend that the city require the left turn lane. And if it's on, say, a 2-lane divided facility, that could be $1 million turn lane. So a business really couldn't operate building that turn lane. So again, I think it's critical that we start looking at the local system and making sure that in the future those parcels are not landlocked on our facility, that they have access to real streets where they can enter and exit where they should. Reasonable and convenient access. State rules states that in the event of a change of use or a major change in traffic pattern, existing driveways are not automatically perpetuated. So that gives us authority to start looking at, okay, can it be taken off the local street or what? But reasonable access must be provided. So for Starbucks, there was much evaluation of this facility. It's next to Snelling, which is a 4-lane divided state facility, Marshall, which is a 4-lane undivided county road. And we worked together very closely with Starbucks, the city, the county, and determined that a right-in, right-out on Marshall should work with a right-out only onto Snelling. And they conducted a traffic study, and they said that should work out just fine. So what bad could possibly happen? Let's see.
St. Paul reached their boiling point when it comes to a certain coffee shop near Marshall and Snelling.
You see, the problem is access to the drive-thru is interfering with traffic on the road, and it's only getting worse. Fox 9's Samuel King live in St. Paul for us tonight. Samuel, this issue is, pardon me, as hot as the coffee they serve, huh?
Yeah, definitely neighbors fed up with what they say is traffic concerns here. They're using the hashtag #Carbucks to describe the situation because they say this Starbucks has a drive-thru, unlike the old one in the neighborhood, and it's that drive-thru that's causing the problem here at Snelling and Marshall. Another day, another driver behaving badly outside the Starbucks at Snelling and Marshall in Merriam Park.
What I saw, people doing illegal U-turns or driving into oncoming traffic just to get coffee, which is crazy.
Attorney Kara Lynham has been chronicling the chaos on Twitter after someone in the neighborhood came up with the hashtag #Carbucks, a nod to the new drive-thru.
Really, it's been driver and car management. So they built a drive-thru in there, and they've been having a hard time with people queuing up into the drive-thru, blocking the bike lanes, blocking traffic.
Lynham says she knew from the day it opened the drive-thru would be a problem, and the Union Park District Council also cited concerns in its opposition to a conditional use permit on the site. The city now conducting tests to see which traffic control method would work best here. These new bollards, or flexible barriers, just installed this week, but the bad behavior continues.
They had to put up more bollards to keep people from driving off the edge of it. And it's like, and then they added the police officers, and they added more. It turned into this like circus.
In the end, Lynham thinks Starbucks should stay, but the drive-thru should go.
And the other location that was just a block away did not have a drive-thru. So clearly we can have a Starbucks in the neighborhood that doesn't have a drive-thru, doesn't have all these safety issues and, you know, bicycle safety, driver safety, pedestrian safety.
The city also planning to install the seasonal barriers here on the bike lanes as soon as the weather permits. They say it's an ongoing conversation with Starbucks. We did reach out to Starbucks corporate, but have not heard back from them yet.
All right, well. Where did that go? Oh, up there. Yeah, and you start making up names for access into our facility, it's usually not a good thing. But the reason they did move a block north of where they were was because of that drive-through. But here you can see that vehicle is going in out of the right in, right out. So it's a very busy area. That's pretty insane. And the thing, one of the reasons we thought it would work because this is urban core and we have a grid system of streets. But I guess if you want your coffee, you really want it. Another thing that we really were lacking in our access management plan is multimodal considerations. But it was interesting, our discussion earlier this morning when they talked about that TRB document that looks at trade-offs between vehicles and bike and ped issues. Because there have been several times where we've required a right-hand turn for the vehicles, and that would result in a jog in the pedestrian sidewalk, so which way do you go? And also there's been a free right where there's been some pedestrian traffic. So what's good for cars is not always good for bikes and peds. So we're hoping in 2019 when we receive that document that it should help out quite a bit. And also in our traffic study, there's a section in our access management plan that deals with traffic impact studies. And how many times have you looked at a traffic impact study and you see hundreds and hundreds of pages worth of vehicle turning movements for a myriad of hours, days, and it just goes on forever, and there's not a word about bikes and peds. My thought is with the update of the access management study, we really do need to look at where is the bike ped networks? Where is origin and destination for those bikes and peds? Where are they coming and going? Where are the barriers to getting them from there to there? So at a minimum, that should be provided in our guidance. And in freight, I talked to our freight guy, and he was mentioning, I haven't heard this yet, but in Wisconsin, on truck routes, all roundabouts are 2 lanes, so the trucks can navigate through there. And there are several where trucks can go right through the middle. So I was thinking we need to take that into consideration when we start during our update of the plan. Purchasing access control. Our manual states that we used to just try to buy access control whenever we could. But our manual now says if you can't get a full block worth of access control, you don't want these openings here, here, and here, because that could make it more difficult when you start moving accesses for various reasons. Or when you want to relocate that access, people kind of consider that they expect to have that access where that break-in access control is. And also traffic impact studies. That's an important part of the plan I talked about a little bit. But if there's 250 vehicles per peak hour or 2,500 new vehicles per day, it meets warrant for a traffic study. But we cannot require the traffic study. It's up to the land use authority to require that traffic study. And at times, they don't want to require that traffic study. But one thing that we did is we got this statement put in the EQB monitor in Minnesota. So if they're doing an EAW and they meet warrants for a traffic study, they're required to develop a traffic study with recommendation that they use our guidance, which will include some nice bike ped verbiage. Oh, environmental workshop, or environmental assessment worksheet. Oh, I also wanted to mention that that's the pedestrian roundabout I was talking about earlier. This was in Isle Royale, and I thought it was so funny. And I wanted to get a picture of my wife and my daughter in the pedestrian roundabout. And my wife, for some reason, decided to walk like Monty Python. But I love that. She's a great wife. And for the update of our access management manual, we're also going to be looking at our development review process and how we issue permits and provide some explanation on that. We're going to look at interchange impact areas where you have the ramps and the city streets and where the next access goes. We're going to look at atypical intersections, as I discussed before. We need to talk about the appeals process because the legislators told us we need to do that. So there's going to be a lot. The new document is still in its infancy stages, but I think based on the experience we have from the old one and what we've learned, I think we're headed in a good spot. And that's me. But thank you, I appreciate that. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Does MnDOT, do you acquire, do you pay for access control?
At times we do. The question was, does MnDOT pay for access control? And if we have a project going through an area and we want to make sure that there's no accesses on there, yeah, we will end up paying for the access control. If there's new development and they're changing their access from one area to another, we often ask for access control and sometimes we get that donated. So depending on who's starting that project. Yes?
The reduced access intersection on Bacon Drive, do you have a time frame on that?
The question was our reduced conflict intersection on Highway 65 in East Bethel. It's the first signalized reduced conflict intersection in the state, so it's very, very cool, and it's going to work out really good. And the question was on the time frame of that. And with that signalized reduced conflict intersection, we also have 6 non-signalized. And we expect to get we're going to be starting this year on the entire project. I think the one in East Bethel is one of the ones we're going to be working on first. And we're going to be working on 2018 and 2019. And I don't recall whether it's going to be finished in 19 or 20, but that's coming up soon. I appreciate you bringing that up. Any other questions? Great, thank you very much.